Hello, everyone. This is the Ophthalmology Business Podcast, where we help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I'm Naren Arul Raja, the founder and one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy, www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Our guest today is Dr. Shehzad Batliwala. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Can you pronounce your name,
Yep.
Doc?
Yep. Shehzad Batliwala. I go by Dr. Shez now
Oh,
because no one
perfect.
can say it.
Yeah, I'm going to call you Dr. Shez for the rest of our conversation. Even me, I have a name that's not easy to pronounce, so I shortened it to Naren. So, a cataract refractive surgeon, a passionate podcaster, blogger, and a visionary in the medical field. His journey from a unique background has shaped his perspective, and he is passionate about sharing his story to help others gain clarity in their own lives. We are really excited to have Dr. Shez with us today. Uh, the topic we will be touching on is a transformative shift in medical education, integrating self-awareness and self-love into our curriculum. And I believe Dr. Shehzad doesn't just talk about what you study when you are in medical school, but also what you learn every day as a practicing doctor. So we're going to have some fun. Before we jump in, Dr. Shez, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you, your story? How did you get into medicine and specifically ophthalmology?
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's always a hard question. Like, who are you? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out. I guess professionally, I'm an eye surgeon, but how I got here was such a circuitous path, right? Um, I grew up undocumented here in the States. My parents brought me here from Mumbai, India, when I was 7 years old. And I just got back from a recent trip to India, actually. I spent 3 weeks there. I just got back this last week. And just looking at that part of the world, I am so grateful, man, that my parents brought me here, right? If they had not brought me here for the betterment of my future and my education, I would be running the streets of Mumbai, India, and in my shorts somewhere, just like struggling to make it. I mean, it just every single day that I have the privilege to do what I do as an ophthalmologist, I'm just like, golly, what a privilege. How lucky am I to do what I do? But I didn't always have this perspective. I went through a pretty significant burnout period in medicine. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And that's where the self-awareness and self-love and all these concepts kind of came to my mind. So yeah, a long answer to your question, an ophthalmologist, but really just someone who's still trying to figure himself out.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think our life is defined not by, like, I feel like I tell my daughters this. I have two girls, one is 21 and one is about to be 18. I tell them the best things that happened to me did not happen as the best things. It was usually the worst things, but there was a tiny silver lining, and that's what changed everything, right? And if you look
Absolutely.
back, right, it's always like when you feel like your chips are down, it's the worst thing. Out of that comes something amazing. The catch is, are you able to see it? Are you able to capitalize on it, right? Are you able to see it as a blessing as opposed to, oh, poor me and only bad things happen to me and all those negative thoughts and emotions that typically come up. So, maybe you can kind of walk us through, and I know I'm putting on the stuff spot. We didn't prep for this. Walk us through, like, I know you mentioned two things. You talked about where you came from as a undocumented 7-year-old from Mumbai, because your parent brought you here, and I bet that was extremely challenging, right? I mean, financially, all kinds of other ways, right? Like being in this country, I bet your parents didn't even, like they didn't fit in, right? If they did, then they would have come in legally, like maybe. And I know we also hear about, Indian parents who come in as professors and et cetera, et cetera. So they definitely, your parents didn't come in that bucket, right? So I'm sure growing up in that environment and of course, eventually becoming an ophthalmologist, I bet, which is one of your parents' dreams. And then you're at the pinnacle of this life and journey as an ophthalmologist. Probably you made your mom very proud and very happy, but then you feel like you're burnt out. You feel like, oh man, I'm at the bottom again, right? So walk us through some of these turning points and perhaps what came out of it. What's the silver lining? And perhaps more recently, that burnout you just touched on, because I assume that has a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, my parents didn't even graduate high school, right? And here I am tickling eyeballs for a living, right? I mean, just like that in itself, when I think about that, I'm like, how did I get here? How did I just wake up one day and I'm an ophthalmologist, right? Um, it was the decision to go to medical school wasn't really something that I made out of my own volition. And I know that sounds weird, right? Because I took the MCAT, I took the USMLE, I did all the things I needed to do to get here, right? I said all the right things, like, oh, I want to be a doctor and I want to help people and all these things. But one thing I've realized is if you are not radically honest with yourself, it's going to be a recipe for disaster, right? It will eventually catch up with you. And so the truth is that, I grew up in a household where, you know, I was always sort of vying for my parents' attention and always just trying to be noticed, right? And one thing that I always remember is that they wanted me to be a doctor, and so it's one of those things that I did honestly to make my parents proud and to kind of capture their love and attention, right? And the other reason I went into medical school and became an ophthalmologist is for money. I mean, my dad was in a ton of debt from back home in India, that my grandparents had put on him, and one of the main reasons he came here to the States was to pay off that debt. And so our conversations on the dinner table growing up were always around, well, are we going to be okay? Like, are we going to have enough income, to pay the bills this month, right? I mean, I'm talking about, as a 12, 13-year old, like, that was always on my mind. And so when I realized that I was really good at taking tests and making really good grades, and doctors make a lot of money, in my simple mind, like, that was a very simple kind of decision, right? I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to help my family out, right?
Right.
And so, you know, those are, I guess, noble reasons or whatever, but they're not reasons that were mine, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
They were just something that it was just decisions made out of like a sense of survival. And so I did it, and went through college, went through medical school, went through residency, and then during residency, um I hit burnout, right? So I just had this like nagging feeling of like just a loss of purpose, right? I had no sense of purpose. Like, why am I doing all of this? Um the training process of medicine didn't help. It's a very kind of bureaucratic system. You're told to do things a certain way. You don't have a lot of autonomy, right? And I'm someone who I really value my autonomy. And so when that was kind of stripped from me, all of the reasons that I went into medical school for in terms of passion and all that went out the window. And all I was seeing was negative. Um, COVID then hits, right? And my dad, who for over 20 years we were fighting this immigration battle. I mentioned I grew up undocumented, and so a lot of my adult life was just spent figuring out how to keep my parents from getting deported out of the country, essentially.
Wow.
Um, and and that was like a major stressor for me during college, medical school, residency. So anyway, so that entire process was coming to an end. My dad got an interview call to go to India, to go to the U.S. consulate and basically, file all of the proper paperwork and come back with his green card. That interview call came in January of 2020, right? A month before COVID. My dad lands in India, COVID hits, and instead of being gone for 3 weeks, which is what our attorneys told us, it ended up being an 18-month long process. And for those 18 months, my dad is stuck in India. I'm managing the family business, and I'm in the middle of my ophthalmology residency, and I'm going through burnout, right? And so, life just has a way of kind of just, hitting you in the face. And that's what happened to me during COVID. Um, and and so I did, you know, what I have never done before. I resigned from my training for my fellowship. I was 6 months into my fellowship and I resigned. I took a step back and I said, you know what? Like, I'm not happy. Life's going down the drain. There's all this stuff going on personally. Let's just take a step back and figure out, like, why is it that I'm not happy? And once I looked in the mirror and addressed all the reasons for my unhappiness, like, well, why did I choose medicine? Right? All the reasons that I mentioned earlier, like I was being honest with myself, got counseling, got therapy, and kind of these answers came to light that actually, you know what? This was not a decision that I made out of my own volition. These were the reasons that I made it. Once you understand that, then you can finally regain agency, right? And now it's like, okay, you know what? Fine, I made those decisions. They weren't maybe the right reasons, but at the end of the day, what can I do right now, right? I'm an ophthalmologist. I help people see. During that time that I took off, I took a mission trip to Mexico. I did some cataract surgeries for third world countries. And man, I'm telling you, like some of those patients, they can't even see a hand in front of their face. And I'm able to go in and in 15, 20 minutes, I'm able to change their life, right? Having those moments just really helped me understand that it is actually a privilege to do what I do, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't
How you
matter.
got there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you got there, right? I mean, we are just the stories we tell ourselves. And so I kept telling myself the story of like, I didn't really want to do this. And I did it for this reason or that reason. But once I started changing the story I was telling myself that actually I have this ability to do really good things with my skill, then I started loving my life, right? Loving ophthalmology, loving medicine, kind of got back into it earnestly. Um, you know, instead of working kind of part-time and taking a step back, I started working full-time as an ophthalmologist. And now I'm this close to starting my own private practice, right? So I've sort of come full circle in terms of, you know, going to medical school, not realizing the right reasons for why I wanted to do it, hitting burnout, hitting my bottom, and now kind of climbing up out of it. And the thing that came, the best thing that came out of all of that is that I understand myself and my decisions so much better than I ever have. Right. So anyway, that's kind of
No,
my
I
story.
think two things that really, just stuck out at me is like you said, we are the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like in the story you were telling yourself is, I'm not happy because it's not what I wanted, it's what my parents wanted, and so forth, right? But whether we like it or not, sometimes I love that movie Forrest Gump, right? Life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what chocolate you're going to get. Here you are versus the 7-year-old from, I assume, not very well off family in India, you know, parents who are not well educated, like you said, high school education. Today you are an ophthalmologist in the US. Right? I mean, like, like,
Exactly.
like it's like, man, it's like I've died and gone to heaven, you know. Why the hell am I not appreciating what I have? And not only, okay, forget about you and the money you can make and the prestige it gives you and everything else, but in 15 minutes, you can change somebody's life for the next 30 years of their life, right? I mean, like, it's like you have this, God has given you this magic power, like almost like this genie to do things that perhaps 99.9% of the people cannot do, you know. And anyway, so that's awesome. And I
Exactly. Yeah.
guess
And having that gratitude though, right? Like that, man, like I am so grateful that I have this ability. When you're not happy with your own life, it's hard to see the changes that you can bring to other people's life, right?
right.
And the way you see that is through gratitude, interestingly, right? And so
Yeah.
that's become a daily practice of mine because I wasn't very I've never been a spiritual person or anything like that, but recently, like having gone through this phase of burnout and coming back from it, I always say I'm in recovery from burnout, right? So being in like recovery now from burnout, one of the big things that I've incorporated into my life every single day is just gratitude, right? Like I mean, just the fact that someone said told me this, you know, our heart beats 200,000 times a day,
Mhm.
right? 200,000 times a day.
Right.
Uh, think about that. That is what keeps us alive. That is what gives us the consciousness to be able to like appreciate everything that we see around us. And so I don't know. There's just something about like going through the process of burnout and then understanding how to come out of it staying present and like being grateful for what you have. Um, it's changed my life, you know.
Absolutely. And I think the second thing you said that really stood out for me is you can't help others till you help yourself. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of us who come from immigrant backgrounds, regardless of, your story or my story or somebody else's story, you're always about achievement and, about, this grade or that, objective, right? Like we never really think, for ourselves. So, and unfortunately, even today, even in the US, this idea of looking inwards, like thinking about who you are, that's not in any textbook. It's not in any class, right? So, like the most important part of life, figuring your own self out, is omitted. It's never talked about. It's never dealt with. So, a lot of people have these holes, and I think you are just standing in for almost all of us. And I guess some people like you know, almost going to the brink and then coming out through burnout, etc., come out. Some people probably just don't come out, but rather just limp along. Some people probably get worse. I mean, you hear about suicide numbers and all kinds of things, right? Like people on drugs for depression and you name it, right? Like, I mean, even though if you were to compare us as a race or a country 10 years ago versus 50 years ago, we are better off. But how come so many people are unhappy, right? So I think talk a little bit about that self-discovery and how did you, I know you talked about therapy, you gave us like a high level overview and
Yeah,
perhaps like let's say if somebody is feeling burnt out, somebody is feeling like you felt, right? Like what's the point of all of this? Like,
yeah.
what would you like to tell them?
I think, it's such a taboo subject, right? Therapy and mental health and all these things. People throw those words out a lot. But man, like this conversation right here is therapy, right? Because all we're doing is we're being vulnerable. We are
Right.
talking about our feelings. I don't know, I don't know what it is, but and I don't think it's just in medicine, but like in general, people don't talk about their feelings. We do
Yeah.
not talk about our emotions, right? So being in touch with your emotions and really understanding, like asking yourself the hard questions. Well, why? Okay, why am I not happy? Well, I hate my life. I hate my work. I hate my career. I hate the fact that I'm an ophthalmologist. Okay, well, why? Right? My favorite question in the world is why, right?
Right.
Why do you not like your work as an ophthalmologist? That's what I asked myself, and with the help of a therapist. And when you ask that question and you dig deeper and deeper and deeper, you kind of unravel the decision making process. Well, why did I make that decision? Right. Well, let's see. Was it my own choice? No, it wasn't. It was actually, if I'm going to be honest with myself, it's not. I wanted to do computer science. I wanted to do aerospace engineering. I was kind of into those types of things, right? But somehow medicine, it was just kind of always, and actually, the other thing is my mom has mental illness, right? So this is another thing that is taboo and people are, shy away from it. And I was kind of ashamed to admit it for the longest time, but now I'm not, right? My mom has schizophrenia and bipolar. And I was 12 when she was diagnosed with that. So watching that, right, just what changes in a person's perception of their reality, that their reality just kind of flips upside down in their head, right? That it just always fascinated me. And so there were a lot of different reasons why I chose medicine, but understanding those reasons is not something that we really do, right? I mean, when's the last time that anybody took, I don't know, an entire day out of their really busy lives just to think about their decisions, think about their
Right.
life, reflect, right? Introspect about where you are in your life. And therapy and getting counseling is a really good way to do that. It's just a dedicated hour and a half, 2 hours with someone who cares to listen, right, about how you're feeling and why. So that's what I did, and that's what I would say to anybody who's struggling. Right, first is like accept the fact that you're struggling. It's totally okay, right? It takes a level of humility, to be like, I'm not fine. I'm not okay. Right. And I need to take a step back and figure out why I'm not okay, because nothing else matters. I mean, you and I were talking about before we started recording this podcast, the best way to really get people to perform is to let them do what they enjoy, right? You're not going to be good at anything if you don't enjoy what you do. And a lot of people out there that are miserable, like me, myself, like I was, it's because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. Well, ask yourself why, right? Or get some help so that people can someone can guide you through that process. And one more thing I want to add to that, um, you know, one of the reasons I think people may be hesitant to talk to a therapist is because this stuff is not easy to talk about. There's shame, right? There's a lot of shame associated with it. You're afraid of being judged. AI is a game changer for that, specifically ChatGPT, right? So, and it sounds weird, but um, ChatGPT is the smartest friend that you can have in your back pocket, right? It's a very objective tool, right? So, what's judgment? Judgment is basically someone being subjective, right? And judging you based on whatever it is that you have to say. ChatGPT is not going to judge you. So I'm not kidding. I talk to ChatGPT like it's my therapist, right? When I was going through therapy and things like that, when ChatGPT didn't come out, it was like COVID time. I got a neuropsychological profile done on me, right? Why do I think the way I do? What's my personality type? All these intricate details about me. I uploaded that entire PDF into ChatGPT. So ChatGPT understands me, right? And now I ask it questions about me. So like if I'm going through a tough time and I'm not feeling that great about an interaction I had or this particular situation that's come my way, I will literally talk to ChatGPT about it. Hey, I'm feeling this way. Why do you think that is? It knows me, and so it helps me process my feelings. It is a game changer for mental health. I
That,
absolutely believe that. So
that is
that's what
amazing.
I would say. It's like $20 a month. I would pay like 2,000. Well, maybe I pay $500 a month for that thing, right? It's 20
Yeah.
bucks a month. So, someone out there who's struggling and you don't want to talk to a therapist because or a human therapist, you're afraid of being judged or what have you, talk to AI. It sounds funny, but it
Yeah.
helps, you know?
Yeah, I think the other thing you said, I think, is such very profound, at least I have found in my life, is the minute you discover the why, minute you can talk about this, minute you can write it on a piece of paper, the power it has over you just evaporates, right?
Yes.
That's where
Yes.
the unhappiness comes from, because it has this invisible power and we haven't gotten rid of that negative power it has over us,
100%.
right?
100%. I couldn't agree more. Yes. The concept you're talking about is just, I call it just calling it out, right?
Right.
Like, call it out. You're not happy because of X, Y, and Z reason. Write it down. Say it, right? Call it out. And there's just something psychological about it. Like you said, when you call it out, it decreases the hold it has on you.
Right. Like the more, like even like, I mean, we know this, like in I'm sure I've seen documentaries and movies. I'm not an expert, like abusive women in abusive relationships, right? The more they don't talk about it, the more they don't deal with it, the more power that abusive relationship has. And even if they leave that particular person, they go to somebody else who's doing the same thing. Just that they're attracted to it subconsciously. The more they get help, the more they can talk about it, the power that thing has, that their attraction to those types of relationships goes away and goes away and goes away. And then finally they get free and they can live a normal life, right? But till you start processing it, till you start writing it down, dealing with it, it just has this invisible power. And I think that to me is the breakthrough. It's not like any of us don't feel bad or feel like we hit our jobs or whatever it is. It's just that we don't talk about it. We just hide it because of shame and everything else. And that's what's hurting us more than anything else. The fact that we are not willing to do anything about it. The fact that we are not able to, we just keep pushing it, pushing it, pushing it. Anyways, kind of
100%. And the
let's
thing is,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and, the brain is very powerful, man. You can't really, you can't really trick it, right? What do I mean by that? Well, like, if you don't talk about those things, which are basically feelings, right? We're talking about
Hmm.
process emotions and your feelings, they will come out in some other way,
Right.
right? And so the more you numb them, that's where things like, addiction, right? That's where those types of diseases start. I mean, if you don't talk about your feelings and you numb them, they're going to come out some way, whether it's, alcohol, drugs, sex, what have you, right? I mean,
Or even
social media,
overeating, right? Like a lot of people, like that's a form of
reading,
addiction. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. At a physiological level, right? From a medical perspective, I mean, it comes down to dopamine, right? I mean, so many people, including myself, I mean, I'm better at this now, but I was addicted to social media,
Hmm.
right? Slowly just scrolling, and comparing yourself to other people, and like this competition for likes and comments, right? Why do we do all those things? To feel good,
Right.
right? Essentially. And why do we not feel good? Because we feel horrible about whatever it is that you're feeling bad about, right? That you haven't processed. So those feelings, they will come out one way or another. And so I think it's best for us to be proactive about it rather than reactive, right? Get the help you need. Talk to your friends. Talk to your colleagues. Your people that are close to you that you can talk to about these things in a vulnerable way.
No, absolutely. Um, let's pivot this podcast a little bit.
Yeah.
You talked about your personal story, and I think what I got out of this is like by being willing to talk about something very publicly, of course, it's good for you, but hopefully other people can say, you know what, I, I can relate to this. This is me, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be the exact story. It doesn't have to be the exact situation, but there's probably some part of it. And so when we talk about burnout and when we talk about mental health challenges, what are you doing to help people? Can you kind of talk about how you are trying to, hopefully be a change in the lives of others, and how are you going about doing that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the only thing any of us really have are our stories, right? Um, so I'm just embracing my story, essentially, right? That's what I'm doing. Um, I'm not hiding it anymore. There was a lot of shame that I had with so much of what I've mentioned to you. I mean, the undocumented part, growing up in a household with mentally ill mom, right? Going through burnout, resigning from my fellowship. I mean, you know, those are not things that are easy for me to say, but they are my story. It's what I went through, and everything happens for a reason, right? I'm a huge believer in that, just from a spiritual perspective. And so, why did those things happen to me? I'm a big believer in that, those things happen to me so that I can understand myself better, right? And hopefully do my part, my very small part in helping potentially other people understand themselves better, right? I'm convinced the only way to do that is to understand your story, and there's so much stigma around talking about these things. I figured the way to break that down is to just talk about it, right? So that's the first thing I'm doing, is just kind of admitting it and talking about it publicly. Um, and then the other thing is, well, so what has all of this taught me? You know, I never really considered things like, what are my value systems, right? Like, what are my values? We all do things because of our values, intentionally or unintentionally. I valued family and survival, right? And that's why I made the decisions I did back in the day of going into medical school, and all the things we talked about. Right. Well, what do I value now? I still value family. I value authenticity, right? I value being your authentic self, being genuine with yourself and others, because I don't think there's any other way to live. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster and sadness, if you're not honest with yourself. So understanding my own value system for why I make the decisions that I do, has been a huge game changer for me. And so, teaching, teaching like high school students about values and maybe just trying to get them to understand their own value system, is another thing that I'm doing. So I speak at high schools about my story and some of the things that we've discussed, because I wish that someone had maybe discussed those things when I was in high school, right? When I was making some of those major decisions in my life on college and medical school and all these things. And
And
so,
also the shame, right? Like if he sees somebody else talking about it, they'll get the courage to talk about it too, right? Because that's what
yeah,
stops us from dealing with it, like that shame, whatever you want to call it.
100% it's shame. 100%. I mean, I gave a talk to a high school. It's been a couple months now, and a um, a high school student emailed me that evening. And I mean, it was one of the most heartwarming emails I've ever gotten. It was just like, thank you so much for sharing your story. I also grew up with immigrant parents, right? I completely relate to what you're going through. I mean, that was proof for me that, like, man, like this is what I want to do with my life, right? Things
Mm.
happen to me for a reason. I went through the events that I did for a reason, and I want to discuss these things openly so that others can understand themselves better. And when I got that email, I mean, that was just like validation that I need to continue this work. So
Right. So right now you're really focused on helping people find out their own stories, helping people be comfortable with talking about their stories. And then of course, writing their new stories, new values, how do this, like you said, we are the stories we tell ourselves. So what is your new story versus what is their new story? So let me ask you this, what is your new story?
well, so I am proud to be a physician and an ophthalmologist, right? I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not, I don't have this, like, I guess imposter syndrome is probably the best way to describe it. Used to suffer from that big time, right? I was not comfortable in my own skin as an ophthalmologist because I didn't believe that I did it for the right reasons.
Mm.
And now, it doesn't matter why I did it. Now I understand the reasons for why I did it. And now going forward, you know, I can, I mean, just one patient at a time, one eyeball at a time, I have this incredible ability to affect change in the world, right? Positive change. I can help people see not just the world, but hopefully see their inner selves as well, right? And so that's one thing, is I really have um kind of owned
Embraced
up.
yourself. Own, yeah. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
how you
yeah.
got here, but you are happy
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
rest
I
of your
own
days.
that
Yeah.
identity,
Yeah.
right? I am an ophthalmologist. I'm a good ophthalmologist, and this is a huge part of what I want to do with my life, right?
Mhm.
And then the other thing I'm telling myself is uh the whole motivational speaking, all these things that I'm doing. Prior to having this understanding of myself, I was, like I said, I was very ashamed of really embracing who I was, why I did the things that I did, and now I am on a mission to help other people understand their stories. So those are kind of the two big narratives of my life going forward. Is I'm an ophthalmologist, I'm a good ophthalmologist, I'm going to go into private practice and deliver the best eye care possible to the people of Dallas, Texas, which is where I'm going to open up my private practice. And two, I'm going to start in my local community, but hopefully, go nationally and maybe even internationally, and help people understand their paths and their stories.
Yeah, the other thing that kind of struck a chord for me, and I'm sure even though you don't articulate it, correct me if I'm wrong, like dealing with shame, right? I mean, talking about your mom's mental illness, I bet was tough for you, and talking about it publicly because it's not even you, it's your mom, probably the person you love the most in the world. So like being able to accept it. But the problem with shame is it just doesn't let you move forward. It just keeps you trapped in a box and you can't get out of the box. So, like, really breaking through every part of your life that you felt ashamed about, because till you release it, till you release that shame and deal with it and accept it and be happy about what happened, like you said, almost like a blessing. Like your past is not a curse. It's really like God did it for a purpose, like so you can do something from it. It's like from that ashes you can build something, right? I assume that is part of your story. I don't know, maybe like helping other people break through these shame prisons they live in. I mean, your mom's an extreme example of a prison, but
Absolutely. I mean, life is, it's all about relationships, right? I mean, you and I were
right,
talking, we're going to be doing business together because of this trust that you and I have, right?
right,
With each other. So life is all about relationships. And for me, I, because of my mom's mental illness and kind of all these things, I never really had a good relationship with her, right? In terms of um I I never really knew my mom, right?
mm,
And I'll give you an example of what happened earlier. I mean, thankfully, she's been doing so much better over the last several years, right? Everything that I'm talking about, this is kind of my teenage years, and now I'm 33 years old.
right,
Just earlier today, right? Just randomly, my mom's like, "Hey, Shehzad." I was like, "Yeah, hey, mom." She's like, "I love you." I was like, "Oh man, thank you. I love you too, mom." And I went downstairs and I hugged her, right? I have never done that before, right? My mom, like, we didn't grow up in a touchy-feely family, right?
right,
This was probably like the second or third time my mom has told me that she loves me, right? All of that has happened because I have faced kind of, all these discussions that we're having. I've talked to my mom about these things, right? I've told her how I
right,
have felt growing up, right? That I
right.
didn't really understand my mom and know who my mom is, right? And that has allowed me to have a much better relationship with my mom. And so, I guess I'm verbalizing this publicly because I'm not the only one. There are tons of people out there who, for whatever reason, don't have good relationships with their parents, right? Or their loved ones,
Right.
right? Face those, face it, right? Accept the fact that you don't and improve it. Try to improve upon it. And I'm just, I guess, I don't know. I'm starting that process by saying it verbally because you gotta walk it, you gotta walk the talk too.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think it releases because I remember a friend of mine, and they had this nickname for him, and like the nickname was came from this thing where he would not spend any money, right? So, and he got really sensitive because the reason he didn't spend any money was that they came from a poor family. The parents had to work their tails off. So almost like when you make fun of that, it feels like they're making fun of their parents. And then finally, he's like 48 years old. He owned up to it, and he said, "This is why I felt so hurt when you used that nickname." Because it brings back the suffering and the pain. And as a good child, I didn't want to be a burden on them. Like, so even if he has a razor that's gone, he wouldn't get a new razor and borrow his friend's razor, and they would make fun of him being this cheap person. But of course, kids are like so mean, right? Like, I mean, they don't understand it. And but it affected him for 48 years, and he would never talk about it. But finally he talked about it. Now he can let go, and he's almost like proud of the fact that his parents took him to how far they took him without any means, right? And he's like, I'm proud of who my parents are. I'm not ashamed of them. I'm not ashamed of my life. And I think it has this freeing feeling, right? It's just unbelievable. It's hard to describe it, but I guess only when you go through it, you realize it. And I commend you for having the courage to, like let these things that were like putting you in this, virtual prisons, right? Like you put yourself in this prison and then you live in it and you believe that's a reality. But it's a prison you made up because of your shame or whatever it is. Just letting those go and hopefully showing other people they can too. That's amazing. What are some of the thoughts you want to leave our colleagues? Let's say somebody who's a practicing doctor, somebody who's a practice owner. Maybe I'll go through one by one rapid fire. Like, what would you tell a practice owner? Like,
Oh man. So, you know, we were talking about this earlier. Good leadership, I think, is recognizing what it is that your people genuinely enjoy doing, right? I think, so many people approach staff and their employees as like, well, here's a task, you're going to do it, I'm the boss, you're the employee, and I said it, so you're going to get it done, right? And we're just talking about this, like, that is not a great way to run a business, because that may not be something that person enjoys doing. So good leadership is about finding what it is that your people are talented in and what they enjoy doing. Ideally, that's, there's a match there. And then giving them the autonomy to do that and getting out of the way, right? I think that's how I plan on running my private practice. So that's one thing that I would say.
Yeah. And what would you tell a colleague who's a practicing ophthalmologist?
Um, a lot of decisions. I have made a lot of decisions for money, and I think that's not a great way to make decisions. I think make decisions based on your values and who you are as a person. If you are radically honest with yourself and make decisions that align with your values, the finances will come. They always do. I'm a big believer in that, right? So, if you're, colleagues of mine who are in private practice and are doing well for themselves, like maybe kind of pivot and start to make decisions that don't always look at the bottom line, right? Look at the people, look at the relationships, look at your own value system, make decisions according to those. And I think the money will always come.
Love that. What would you tell somebody working in a practice? And let's say an office manager, or let's start with an office manager and then let's talk about team members.
Be vulnerable, right? Be vulnerable with both your supervisor, your employer, and your employees, the people that you're leading. If there's something that isn't working well, um, talk to your employer about it, right? Hopefully the culture is such that those types of discussions and conversations are welcome. That's how I would want to run my practice. And if you're in an environment where those discussions are not welcome, um, and you're not able to kind of play out your role by being authentically you, then make a change.
Love that. Any comments on patient care to anybody who's in ophthalmology?
I think for me, it comes down to put yourself in their shoes, right? Before you recommend a surgical procedure, um, you know, is it something you would want for yourself or your mother or your father, your sibling, right? And if the answer to that is no, then the answer is no for that patient as well. So I think just treating your patients like your own family members. I mean, I think that's key.
So it means listening to them, understanding them, and like you said, doing what's best for them.
100%.
Thank you so much. If somebody is interested in following you, I mean, I think you're going to be an interesting person, and I bet 10 years from now you're going to look back and say, "Remember Shaz in 2024
I don't
to
know about that, but
2024?"
I haven't. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and all the stuff. Visionary Doc. So visionarydoc.com is my website, and that has links to all the social media and stuff.
Absolutely. We'll put all those links, the all the social links, as well as your website link. So hopefully people can, follow you, stay connected. And I hope even if we help one person, who's going through some challenges, whether it's burnout or, feeling like, there's no purpose or meaning in their lives. And if it made a difference in one person's life, I think this time we spent together recording this podcast would have made it up in like droves, right? That's a win. That's a huge win.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And it's, man, you're one of those people. It's you meet people and you talk to them and you kind of get this like heartwarming feeling. You're one of those people, so I really appreciate this conversation. Even prior to this podcast, just everything we've talked about, you're a prime example of good leadership. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I really enjoyed our conversation, Shez, and thank you for everything you are doing. And I love the fact that you're going to have 50 years in front of you. And I'm not talking to the 29 or 30-year-old burnt out Shez. I'm talking to the 33-year-old, maybe slightly more enlightened Shez, right? And hopefully, the more you live life and deal with your feelings
Absolutely.
and deal with your thoughts, you're going to hopefully keep improving. So this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the story. And I think the more you figure yourself out, then you're going to help other people also. So it's going to be like an awesome story. So thank you for what you're doing.
Equimarketing, your key to a stellar online reputation. Book your free marketing strategy meeting with Ryan today. Visit www.obacademy.org/MSM/Ryan and take charge of your online presence.
I also want to take a minute to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you love this podcast, I hope you did. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the best podcasts I have ever recorded. So, I mean, it's not because Shez is smarter than anybody else or he went to Harvard or whatever that nonsense, right? It's really because he's vulnerable. He's willing to talk about the things that we don't want to talk about. And I think that's what makes him a Superman. And I really think we need more people like him who are willing to tell the truth and who are willing to, even if it's directed at themselves, right? We love to tell the truth about other people, but when it's directed at us, we just, we are perfect. Everything is just, hunky-dory, right? So I think we need more people like that because most of us don't want to talk about ourselves. Don't want to. Anyway, so thank you, Shez, for everything you're doing. So if you love this podcast, please share it on social media. Of course, write a review for us on iTunes or Google Play, and even forward it to a friend. Perhaps if you feel like it would help him or her. Could be a colleague, could be somebody who's a young person, right? I mean, he's even helping high school kids, and hopefully it'll make a difference somewhere. So I hope you share it, and I hope you get something out of it, and I hope you follow Shez and maybe even talk to him one of these days if you feel like he can be of help to you. Till we meet again with another amazing episode of this podcast, have an awesome week ahead. Thank you.